Yes, it's true. My wife cheated on me and eventually left me for another man. At first, I was consumed by fury, ready to unleash havoc on both of them. But in the end, I didn't act on those impulses. Now, I know this might sound like the start of some revenge tale, but that's not what this is about. I'm Ethan Marshall, just your average guy. I've never been the kind of man who turns heads, and for a big part of my life, I struggled with being overweight. Things began to shift in high school when I joined the football team, earning me the nickname Chipper. They said if I chipped someone, they weren't getting back up. Standing tall at 6 feet 3 inches and weighing in at 260 pounds, it felt like football was a natural fit for me. I wasn't exactly an all-star, but I had a solid upper body, which helped me bulldoze defensive linemen. Football turned out to be a blessing during those 4 years. It helped me shed a lot of the extra weight I'd carried for so long. Sure, I still had a bit of a belly, but the muscle I gained made up for it. Despite the changes in my body, I never quite shook the image of myself as the chubby kid. That mindset stuck with me, as did the memories of being relentlessly teased about my weight in grade and middle school. By the time I got to high school, playing football shielded me from the bullies, and it even gave me a little social currency. I wasn't dating cheerleaders or anything, but a few girls were open to going out with me. Still, I didn't date much until my senior year. That's when Nina came into the picture. Nina Caldwell had transferred to our school late in my junior year, but she didn't really catch my eye until senior year. She was, without a doubt, the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen. But she carried an extra 30 or 40 pounds, which made her invisible to most of the guys in our class. I hate to admit it now, but at first, I was just as shallow. It wasn't until we were paired up as chemistry partners that things started to change. Chemistry was a tough subject for me, but Nina? She was a natural. She helped me through it, and honestly, I owe her for my passing grade, and probably for making it to college at all. While we worked together, I got to know the real Nina. She was funny, easygoing, and kind. I found out she'd had a rough start in life, dealing with a congenital heart defect that delayed her schooling. I'd been held back a year myself, thanks to my parents, so we had that in common. Both of us were 19, and that somehow made it easier to ask her out. Nina was hesitant at first. Understandable, given the way people had probably treated her before. But she said yes. Our first date was nothing fancy, a movie and ice cream afterward, but it was fun. I was so nervous that I didn't even try to kiss her goodnight. Instead, I shook her hand like an idiot and asked if I could call her. To my surprise, she looked thrilled and said yes, and soon we were going out regularly. By the third date, I worked up the nerve to kiss her on the cheek, and after that, things got a little more romantic. The more time I spent with Nina, the more I realized how much I liked her. While our relationship was blossoming, my football season took an unexpected turn. Cavern High wasn't exactly known for its football program, but that year, everything seemed to click. We had Logan Parker, a stellar quarterback, and the Morris twins, Jake and Liam, as our running backs. My job as the left tackle was to protect Logan's blind side, and I'm proud to say he didn't get sacked once that season. After losing our opener to Mohawk High, a team that was practically legendary, we bounced back and won 7 straight games, eventually making it to the regionals. We even took down Mohawk in the semifinals with an unbelievable 38-7 victory. Sure, we lost the state finals to Towson High, but making it that far was still something to be proud of. Sorry for the detour into my football glory days. It's a habit of mine to reminisce. Back to Nina. As prom season approached, I didn't waste any time asking her to be my date. She said yes with a big smile and an even bigger kiss. Over the next few weeks, Nina went on a crash diet to fit into a gorgeous prom dress she'd picked out. She lost about 20 pounds, and when I saw her that night, I was stunned. Even though most guys would still call her heavy, to me, she was breathtaking. Nina always had a generous figure, and that light blue dress only highlighted her curves. That night at prom felt magical. We danced the night away, and when it was over, I suggested parking somewhere, but Nina had other ideas. She directed me to a tiny hunting cabin her uncle owned about 30 miles out of town. It was a simple place, just a little kitchen, a couch in front of an old TV, a bed, and a bathroom. We started out fooling around on the sofa and ended the night in the bed. I dropped her off at home just before her 2 a.m. curfew. Nina and I stayed close for the rest of high school. We were careful about taking precautions in our physical relationship, and everything seemed to be going well. After graduation, I got a partial football scholarship to a Division II school 2 states away, while Nina chose to stay local and attend community college. My major was computer science, while Nina decided on psychology. With me heading off to college, we had a difficult talk about our future. We agreed, reluctantly, that it would be best to break up. Neither of us wanted to hold the other back, but that decision crushed me. Leaving Nina behind felt like tearing my own heart out. She tried to reassure me, saying that if we were meant to be together, we'd find our way back. But that didn't ease the fear gnawing at me, the fear of losing her forever. When I arrived at Mountain Ridge University, the thought of turning right around and going back home was overwhelming. But I couldn't abandon my commitment. I'd worked too hard to get there, and I knew a college degree was my ticket to a better life. The only way I could cope was by throwing myself headfirst into football and schoolwork. I packed my days so full that I didn't have time to dwell on how much I missed Nina. The coaches warned me not to overdo it, but they couldn't help being impressed by my work ethic. Between a full load of classes, grueling football practices, and intense weight training, I didn't have a moment to breathe. The physical demands of the program reshaped my body, trading fat for solid muscle. Still, I couldn't shake the guilt of knowing my parents were scraping together the money to cover what my partial scholarship didn't. Playing football meant I couldn't work to contribute. Even though I couldn't afford trips home, I made sure to call Nina every week. She sounded as devastated by our breakup as I felt, and those calls became my lifeline. By the end of my first year, I'd managed to thrive both on and off the field. I earned a spot as a starting left guard by the third game of the season, my strength making up for my lack of speed. We finished the year with an impressive 8-2 record, and I made the dean's list, which made my parents proud. When summer rolled around, Nina and I slipped back into each other's lives. I was head over heels for her, or at least I thought I was. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if it was love, or just physical attraction. After much reflection, I leaned toward love, as there's still a small part of me that cares for her. That summer, I worked, took online courses, and spent as much time with Nina as possible. We resumed our intimate relationship with a renewed intensity. I managed to finish college in just 3 years, and the moment I graduated, I married Nina. We both landed jobs at Triorbit Electronics in Virginia, me in software development and Nina in human resources. After saving for a while, we bought a modest house and started talking about having kids. The first few years of marriage were mostly wonderful, except for one thing. We both put on a lot of weight. By the time we hit our third anniversary, Nina was 230 pounds, and I tipped the scales at 310. Thanks to my height, I carried the extra pounds better, but neither of us was happy with how we looked. We tried dieting, but nothing seemed to stick. Even so, my love for Nina never wavered. I thought she was beautiful no matter her size. After 3 years without kids, we decided to see a doctor. The test came back fine, but he suggested losing weight might improve our chances of conceiving. That was the push we needed to get serious about dieting. In 6 months, Nina lost 50 pounds, and I dropped about 25, though I'll admit I wasn't as disciplined as I should have been. Encouraged by her progress, Nina started going to the gym 5 days a week. Seeing her transformation inspired me to get my act together. I stuck to our diet more strictly and joined her at the gym. By the end of the year, Nina had shed an impressive 80 pounds, and I was down 90. We both felt incredible, but I had no idea that her newfound confidence was about to shatter my world. Nina began dressing in ways that showed off her slimmer figure. At first, I enjoyed seeing her newfound self-assurance, but that changed the day I overheard some inappropriate comments about her at work. I didn't feel like I could say anything, though. Nina had spent most of her life feeling invisible, and now she was basking in the attention she'd never had before. She was the swan who'd emerged from a lifetime of being an ugly duckling. The real trouble started when Logan Parker, my old high school quarterback, was promoted to head of human resources at our company. Logan was now Nina's boss and 2 levels above me. At first, I wasn't too concerned. Logan was married to Emma Taylor, a former cheerleader who still looked amazing at company events. I figured there was no reason to worry. But things took a turn during the company Christmas party. Nina insisted I dance with Emma while she partnered with Logan. I didn't think much of it at the time, even though I couldn't help but feel a little awkward watching Nina with Logan. Emma was surprisingly friendly, which caught me off guard. I'd expected her to be snobby. As we danced, I noticed how stunning Nina looked. I even joked, somewhat nervously, that someone should keep an eye on her. It was just a passing comment, but looking back, I wish I'd taken my own advice. I awkwardly mentioned that someone should probably keep an eye on Nina, feeling embarrassed as the words left my mouth. Emma simply smiled and thanked me for the compliment, and I quickly followed up by thanking her for being so kind. She blushed, and the music ended, leaving me feeling a little flustered but ready to move on. Fast forward about 5 months before our 4th anniversary, Nina hit me with a bombshell. She told me she decided to start taking birth control pills again. I was caught off guard and asked her what happened to our plans for having kids. Calmly, almost too casually, she said she wasn't ready for that yet. My frustration boiled over, and I pressed her for a better explanation. Stroking my arm in an almost dismissive way, she smiled and said, "Don't worry, we'll have kids someday. I just don't want to get fat again. I want to enjoy being slim for a while." Looking back, that should have been my wake-up call, but I didn't see it. I trusted Nina completely, too naive to realize what was happening. My mistake wasn't just in trusting her, it was trusting Logan. That man couldn't be trusted to carry a bag of groceries, let alone honor someone else's marriage. What I didn't know at the time was that Logan had been relentlessly pursuing Nina. And Nina? She was eating it up. The former high school football star showering her with attention? She couldn't resist. At first, I brushed off my unease. But when Nina started working late more often and then meeting up with friends afterward, the alarm bells started ringing. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it. But as the late nights turned into early mornings, my suspicions grew. I tried to ignore the signs, but I'm not an idiot. Finally, I hired a private investigator. Within a week, they had everything. The evidence hit me like a freight train. There were photos of Nina and Logan being affectionate over dinner, videos of Logan sneaking into our house while I was at work, and worst of all, a video of them, together, in Logan's office. To top it off, there were pictures of them on our living room floor. The private investigator had taken those through the front window. I can't even put into words the pain I felt when I saw those images. It was like a piece of me had been ripped out and crushed. Nina wasn't just cheating on me. She was cheating with someone I had once considered a friend. Sure, Logan and I weren't close, but I still thought of him as someone I could trust. Clearly, I was wrong. Still, I held on to some hope. I thought that if I confronted Nina, she'd realize the mistake she'd made. I was in love with her, and I foolishly believed she still loved me too. That night, after dinner, I told Nina we needed to talk. She looked confused but sat down at the kitchen table. I laid the evidence out in front of her. The color drained from her face, and she buried her head in her hands. Then, she bolted for the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind her. I followed, knocking and asking her to come out, but she refused. Eventually, I gave up and went back to the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of rum to steady my nerves. After what felt like hours, she finally emerged. She sat back down at the table, her head hanging low. In a cold voice, I asked what she had to say for herself. Barely above a whisper, she said she hadn't meant for it to happen. When I pressed her, she snapped, telling me there was no need to be crude. Then she had the audacity to suggest that maybe, if I had paid her more attention, none of this would have happened. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. For a brief moment, I questioned myself. Had I been neglecting her? But then anger surged through me, and I shut that thought down. "Don't you dare try to pin this on me," I growled. "This is on you. You made this choice." I demanded to know why she did it, but she just stared at me, her eyes darting nervously. My patience snapped, and I asked her point blank, "Do you want to be with me or Logan?" Tears streamed down her face as she confessed she loved me but admitted she had feelings for Logan too. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces, but I managed to keep my voice steady as I told her she had until the next day to decide. "If you want to stay with me," I said, "you'll need to cut Logan out of your life completely. Quit your job, go to counseling, whatever it takes. But you need to choose." Nina nodded, but her expression gave me no comfort. That night, I packed up her belongings and told her to sleep in the guest room until she made up her mind. The next day, I couldn't focus on anything. My stomach churned, and I felt like I was going to be sick all morning. I left work early, knowing I was completely useless there. By the time Nina came home, around 6, I was sitting at the kitchen table again, just like the night before. She sat across from me, her face pale and nervous. I demanded her decision. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she said she loved me but couldn't let Logan go. "I love him too," she admitted, her voice barely audible. I let out a deep sigh, trying to hide the fact that her words had gutted me. Inside, I was spiraling, my thoughts flipping between rage and despair. "So that's it, huh?" I said bitterly. "You've chosen quite the guy." I couldn't stop myself from twisting the knife. I brought up Logan's wife, Emma, and their new baby boy. "Does it bother you at all," I asked, "that you're helping him destroy his family? Leaving that kid without a father?" Nina's face flushed with a mix of anger and shame. She muttered that Logan had been planning to leave Emma long before they started their affair. "And our marriage?" I asked, my voice sharp and unyielding. "Does 4 years together mean so little to you that you're ready to throw it all away?" I sat there, grappling with a storm of emotions. Anger, heartbreak, and an overwhelming urge to lash out. Part of me wanted to hit Nina, to vent my rage in the most destructive way possible. Another part of me fantasized about finding Logan and wringing his neck. But deep down, I knew none of that would help. Nina spoke softly, apologizing for hurting me, but she quickly added that she hadn't planned for any of this to happen. She insisted she had fallen deeply in love with Logan, and he felt the same way. Her voice was tender, but her words cut me like a knife. She claimed she needed to be with him. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to explode. A small, logical voice in the back of my mind reminded me that violence wouldn't change a thing. It would only make everything worse. So, I held it together. Barely. I refused to show her the full extent of my pain, and I sure as hell wasn't going to beg her to stay. I knew that would only make me look weak, and I wasn't about to give her or Logan that satisfaction. I told her plainly, "If you want a divorce, you'll have it." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of confusion, or maybe even hurt, in her eyes. Perhaps she had expected me to fight for her, to plead with her to stay, but I knew better. If she had already made up her mind to leave, there was nothing I could say or do to stop her. Nina seemed taken aback by my calmness, but she didn't argue. She got up and started packing her things. The next day, I went to the bank and met with our financial advisor. I explained the situation and withdrew half of the money from each of our accounts, setting up new accounts in my name alone. I canceled all our joint credit cards and applied for new ones under my name. Then, I called a realtor friend and put the house on the market. Finally, I hired a divorce lawyer, ensuring Nina was served at work, with infidelity cited as the cause. I wanted her to feel the consequences of her choices. The divorce process was fairly straightforward. With only 4 years of marriage and no children, there wasn't much to fight over. We split everything evenly and went our separate ways. Logan's divorce, however, was a complete mess. His wife, Emma, had never worked, and with a baby under a year old, she hit him hard with demands for both child support and alimony. One detail of Logan's situation gave me a twisted sense of satisfaction. He tried to save money by hiring a cheap lawyer, and it backfired spectacularly. Instead of capping spousal support at a couple of years, he ended up agreeing to pay it for 15. Logan wasn't happy about it, but he signed the papers. 2 months after our divorces were finalized, Logan and Nina got married. That was a bitter pill to swallow. The first week after Nina left was a blur. I didn't know what to do with myself. I'm not much of a drinker, so drowning my sorrows in alcohol wasn't an option. Instead, I found myself consumed by thoughts of revenge. I'm sure any man who's been cheated on can relate. I spent hours scouring the internet, reading stories of how other men got back at their ex-wives or their lovers. The more I read, the darker my thoughts became. At one point, I even bought a weapon, though I'm ashamed to admit it now. Initially, my revenge fantasies were violent. Later, they shifted to property damage. I thought about slashing their tires, pouring sugar in their gas tanks, or flooding their house. But as I kept reading these stories, I began to see how absurd and impractical most of them were. Eventually, I realized I needed help. I went to my church and met with the pastor, who spent nearly 2 hours counseling me. He explained that revenge wouldn't ease my pain. No matter how much harm I inflicted on Nina or Logan, the hurt inside me would still be there. His advice was simple, but at the time, it felt impossible to follow. He told me the only way to heal was through time and distance. He said staying near Nina, seeing her but not being able to be with her, would only keep the wound fresh. As much as I hated to admit it, I knew he was right. Not long after, I heard rumors at work that the company was in trouble. Apparently, we had taken on a high-stakes government contract with the Defense Department. The project involved developing cutting-edge software and electronics for the Air Force's fighters and bombers. I can't share the details since it's classified, but the goal was to give the U.S. a significant technological edge over Russia and China. The problem? The project was way behind schedule and massively over budget. If we didn't deliver on time, the penalties could bankrupt the company. As one of the senior software designers, I was called in to help figure out a solution. Most of my colleagues were updating their resumes and planning their exits, unwilling to risk being associated with a potential failure. But for me, the stakes felt different. After the divorce, my needs were simple. Losing my job didn't scare me as much as the thought of staying in the same town as Nina. The decision to dive into the project was solidified when I heard Nina was pregnant. The news hit me like a gut punch. I had always envisioned starting a family with her, and now she was having a child with Logan. It was a bitter reminder of everything I'd lost. With nothing left to lose, I threw myself into the project. As I reviewed the data, it became clear that the current direction was doomed to fail. Despite the enormous risks, I decided to take on the project and move to California, putting nearly 3,000 miles between Nina and me. It felt oddly similar to my first year of college, leaving behind a painful chapter and burying myself in work. My days were grueling, often stretching to 20 hours, but the relentless schedule left me little time to dwell on my ex-wife or the mess she'd made of my life. One of my first decisions on the job was to overhaul the team entirely. I fired 3/4 of the programmers and all the engineers who had been working on the electronic components, bringing in new talent. Some even poached from rival companies. The task ahead seemed impossible, with just 11 months left to meet the Defense Department's deadline. But I scrapped all the previous work and explained my vision to the new team. Initially, they were skeptical, but as I broke down the details of what I wanted and why, their doubts turned into curiosity and eventually determination. The real hurdle wasn't just the hardware. It was getting the software to work seamlessly with it. Slowly but surely, my team and I crafted a program that I started to feel confident about. By the time we conducted the first full test, merging the software with the electronics, just 3 weeks before the final deadline, the results were staggering. A 96% success rate. The remaining 4%? Minor glitches I was able to resolve quickly. The success of the project triggered a tidal wave of change. Within months, the company's stock soared over 300 points, and the Defense Department expanded our contract to include the Navy, Army, and Marines. The projected profits ran into the billions. Beyond the military applications, I saw the potential to adapt the program for commercial use. Stripping out the classified elements, we created a platform with endless possibilities. My efforts didn't go unnoticed. I was promoted to Senior Vice President and tasked with overseeing the development of these commercial applications. In the years that followed, I occasionally had to visit the Virginia office, but I never ran into Logan or Nina. I didn't expect seeing them would affect me anymore, but I still preferred to avoid them. The pastor had been right. Time and distance had helped me move on. My life was no longer tethered to the heartbreak Nina had caused. During one of those visits, I ran into someone I hadn't seen since high school, Megan Morris, a former cheerleader and Emma's best friend. Back in the day, I'd harbored a bit of a crush on her. Megan had always been kind and approachable, with a warm smile that made her impossible not to like. She was still attractive, even after all these years, though in a very different way than Nina. While Nina had short blonde hair and an ample figure, Megan was petite, barely 5 feet 3 inches, with long black hair and a leaner frame. Yet her smile had the same warmth I remembered. We bumped into each other in a grocery store while I was preparing for a board presentation. I was staring blankly at the frozen dinners when I heard her call my name. I turned to see her standing there, her cart next to mine, and for a moment, I felt a familiar nervous blush creeping up my neck. "Ethan? I can't believe it's you," she said, smiling. I smiled back, surprised and flattered she recognized me after all this time. "Wow, Megan, it's been ages. You look great." She confessed she wouldn't have recognized me if Emma hadn't mentioned I worked at TriOrbit during a lunch date they'd had. That surprised me. I hadn't known Megan worked at the same company. "I've been in marketing here for about 6 years, she explained with a grin. I felt a bit guilty for not knowing that, but since I had little interaction with marketing, I couldn't blame myself too much. Still, I felt like I should have been aware. "How are you doing these days?" I asked, trying to ease my discomfort. Megan's smile faltered for a moment, and she sighed. "I'm doing as well as I can, I guess. I'm divorced now." Liam turned out to be a complete idiot. He wasn't just cheating with his secretary. He had affairs with half a dozen other women. One of them even got pregnant. Needless to say, I divorced him. I shook my head, stunned. "I'm so sorry, Megan. I had no idea. I knew Liam had a wild streak back in the day, but I thought he'd settled down after getting married." She shrugged, her emerald green eyes clouded with frustration. "I thought so too. The divorce itself wasn't too complicated. No alimony since we earned about the same, no house, and not much savings. He only pays child support, and even that's a struggle to get. Worst of all, he completely ignores our son, Noah. That infuriates me more than anything." "I'm really sorry you've had to deal with that," I said earnestly. Liam had no idea what he was throwing away. For a moment, we just looked at each other, and I found myself unsure of what to say next. Finally, I mentioned my own divorce, explaining that Nina had chosen to pursue Logan. Megan's expression darkened. "No, Ethan," she said, shaking her head. "It wasn't like that. Emma told me Logan pursued Nina, not the other way around." I sighed. "I suppose that's true, but it still takes two to tango." She glanced at my cart, raising an eyebrow. "You're not seriously thinking about eating any of these frozen dinners, are you?" I laughed awkwardly. "Unfortunately, yeah. I'm a terrible cook. This is about the best I can manage." Megan gave me a playful smile. "Tell you what, if you want a real, home-cooked meal, why don't you come over to my place? It won't be fancy, but I promise it'll be better than this." I hesitated for a moment, unsure if it was a good idea, but the thought of a homemade meal, and the warmth in Megan's offer, was too tempting to resist. I smiled and told Megan I'd love a real meal, especially since I couldn't even remember the last time I'd had one. That evening turned out to be unexpectedly delightful. Megan whipped up a hearty dinner: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, string beans, and sherbet for dessert. Sitting at her table, sharing a meal, and having someone to talk to felt like a luxury I hadn't realized I'd missed. Her son, Noah, was a lively and friendly kid. I learned he was a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan, just like me. That little detail sparked a great conversation about the team and their chances in the upcoming season. I'm a diehard fan and a season ticket holder with 4 seats on the 50-yard line. My company covers the tickets for entertaining clients, but when I don't have clients to take, I either invite friends or end up going alone. Sometimes, I give away the extra tickets to people looking to buy from scalpers. Noah's eyes lit up when he mentioned how much he'd love to see a game in person. Without thinking, I blurted out, "Well, I'll take you to a game sometime." As soon as the words left my mouth, I realized I'd overstepped. "That is," I added quickly, "if your mom is okay with it." Noah immediately turned to Megan, his face full of hope. Megan gave him a measured look and said, "We'll discuss it later, after dinner." I felt terrible. "I'm sorry about that," I said, apologizing directly to her. "It just slipped out. But really, I do have 4 season tickets and plenty of frequent flyer miles. If you're comfortable with it, I'd be happy to take him." Megan stood there, looking at me with piercing eyes that made me squirm a little. I realized I'd put her on the spot, so I tried to backtrack again, only to fumble my words. And of course, you're invited too." I stammered. "We could, get separate rooms. One for you and Noah, and one for me. Totally separate." No pressure, obviously. Megan laughed and called me the sweetest man, her chuckle easing the tension. Your face right now is absolutely priceless, she added, shaking her head. I let out a relieved sigh, grateful I hadn't offended her. I genuinely enjoyed her company and hoped we could spend more time together. Feeling a little bolder, I asked, would you mind if I called you when I'm in town? Maybe we could go out sometime, if you're not seeing someone, of course. I just really enjoy talking to you. Megan studied me for a moment, her emerald eyes softening into a smile. Ethan, I've known you since high school. I always thought you were cute and one of the nicest guys, but I never considered dating you because I had Liam. Now that I've gotten to know you a little better, yes, I'd love it if you called me. And I'd definitely love to go to a Bucks game with you and Noah. Over the next year, I called Megan every time I returned to Virginia. We met up often, and I even booked trips back east when I didn't really need to. It wasn't a romance at first, just a good friendship. We enjoyed each other's company, and that was enough. Toward the end of the year, I took Megan and Noah to the Bucks' final game of the season. The stakes were high. The team needed a win to make the playoffs, and they pulled it off. Noah was ecstatic, bouncing with excitement all night. After Noah went to bed, I was in my hotel room watching a sports channel recap the game when there was a knock at the door. It was Megan. I opened the door, concerned something might be wrong. Is everything okay? I asked, wondering if Noah was all right. Megan smiled reassuringly. Noah's fine. He's fast asleep. I just wanted to have a drink and talk. I glanced down at myself, realizing I was in a t-shirt and boxers. Sure. Let me just put some pants on. I searched around but couldn't find my trousers, which only made me feel more awkward. Megan laughed as she walked into the room. Relax, she said, giggling. If it bothers you that much, I can even the playing field. With that, she unzipped her skirt and let it fall to the floor, leaving her in her blouse and underwear. My face turned bright red. Still chuckling, Megan said, why don't you mix us some drinks, and we can just talk? I managed to grab a couple of rum bottles and cans of Coke from the minibar, mixing us drinks while Megan made herself comfortable on my bed, sitting cross-legged. Her white lace underwear caught my eye, but I tried to focus on not spilling the drinks. When I handed her a glass, I hesitated, unsure where to sit. Megan patted the bed beside her and said with a playful smile, Come on, I don't bite. Reluctantly, I sat down next to her, taking a big gulp of my drink to calm my nerves. We talked for a while, and as we finished our drinks, I got up to put the empty glasses in the trash. I assumed Megan would head back to her room, but she stayed put. When I sat down again, she leaned in and kissed me, quick and soft, but enough to send an electric shock through my body. Seeing the surprise on my face, Megan smiled and said, I've been waiting for months for you to kiss me. Megan smiled knowingly as she said, I think you've always seen me as that high school cheerleader who was out of reach. Let me tell you, Ethan, I'm not that girl anymore. She had me pegged. She could see right through me. There had been so many moments when I'd wanted to kiss her but held back out of fear. Fear of ruining our friendship, of losing the connection we'd built. But now, I wasn't going to hold back anymore. I leaned forward and kissed her. What started as a gentle kiss deepened into something electric. Our tongues explored each other's mouths, and she tasted sweeter than I'd ever imagined. When we finally pulled back, I told her how incredible she was, how beautiful, kind, and amazing. She smiled softly and rested her head on my chest, and the night that followed was beyond anything I'd experienced before, even surpassing my first time with Nina. 6 months after that night, Megan and I got engaged. Noah was over the moon about the news, excited to have me as his dad. A year later, Megan and I were married. It wasn't long before I realized just how accurate Megan's assessment of Liam had been. He was every bit the turd, she described. Liam barely acknowledged Noah and clearly resented me. Every time he came to Megan's place while I was there, he made a point of bragging about how happy Logan and Nina were, as if that would bother me. I'd just smile politely and say nothing. Through those encounters, I learned that Logan was still the head of human resources at our company, but Nina had left her job to be a full-time mom. They had 3 kids now, which surprised me, but the news didn't stir any emotions. That part of my life felt like ancient history. One day, I overheard Megan on the phone, giving Liam an earful for missing yet another child support payment. I made the mistake of suggesting she let it go, telling her I'd be happy to cover anything no one needed. Megan turned to me, her voice firm and unwavering. No, Ethan, this isn't about the money. It's about making him take responsibility for his son. She was right, of course, and I quickly backed down, apologizing for overstepping. By December, I was set to be named Executive Vice President of Triorbit. The announcement was scheduled for the company's Christmas party at the Washington Convention Center, with hundreds of people in attendance. While I felt a bit uncomfortable about the grand recognition, Megan was ecstatic. She scolded me for my reluctance. "You deserve this, Ethan," she insisted. "I've heard so many stories about how this company wouldn't even exist without you. And next year, when Ryan steps down, you'll be the CEO." I chuckled, brushing off the idea, but she smiled knowingly and then told me she had a surprise. With a mischievous grin, she reminded me of a past incident in Kansas City involving a mishap with a rubber. It took me a second, but when I realized what she meant, my face lit up. She confirmed what I suspected. She was pregnant. Wrapping her arms around me, she whispered that she couldn't wait to start this next chapter of our lives together. That evening, as we danced at the party, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Megan had a way of lighting up a room, drawing people to her with her warmth and charm. During our dancing, we ran into Logan and Nina, who were with Liam and his date, Laura. I couldn't help but notice how much Nina's weight had returned, while Logan had developed a noticeable belly himself. Liam, however, was still in great shape, likely because he was still out chasing women. Before I could dwell on the awkwardness of the encounter, the CEO, Ryan Bennett, took to the stage. He announced my promotion with a glowing speech, spotlighting me as the new executive vice president. The applause was overwhelming, and Megan pulled me into a passionate kiss right there in front of everyone. When the commotion settled, I glanced over at Logan, Nina, Liam, and Laura. Liam looked irritated, and Logan's expression was filled with jealousy. But Nina? There was something different in her face. A sadness, a sense of loss. I didn't know what to say, but Megan stepped in gracefully. She greeted everyone warmly, hugging each of them, and even extended a polite handshake to Laura. Following her lead, I shook hands with Logan, Liam, and Laura, and gave Nina a brief, friendly hug. Then Megan suggested something unexpected. "Ethan, why don't you dance with Nina? I'll dance with Liam, and Laura can dance with Logan." I shot her a questioning look, but she just smiled reassuringly. Reluctantly, I agreed. As I danced with Nina, I asked how she and Logan were doing, not knowing what else to say. She hesitated before admitting that things weren't going well. She suspected Logan was being unfaithful. I genuinely felt sorry for her and said as much. Nina looked at me skeptically and asked if I really meant it, or if I was just being polite. "I expected you to say something like, 'It serves you right,'" she added. I paused, taken aback. "Honestly, Nina, when we first broke up, I probably would have said that," I admitted. "But I could never hate you. You were my first love. Losing you hurt like hell, but I've moved on. Life has a way of healing those wounds." The music ended, and tears welled up in Nina's eyes. She confessed that leaving me was the biggest mistake of her life and that she wished she could undo it. As she walked away, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for her. Megan slipped her arm around my waist, and I leaned down to kiss her. When I asked how her dance with Liam went, she laughed. "He actually tried to hit on me. He said he's ready to settle down now and would love to get back together." Can you believe that? I just told him, "Why would I want you when I already have the greatest man in the world?" We both glanced toward the table where Nina had returned. She sat with tears in her eyes while Logan and Liam seemed to be having a heated argument. It didn't take much to guess that Logan had probably made a move on Liam's date, Laura. As we left the party that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The pain of losing Nina had left a scar, like a deep cut that never fully heals. But my pastor had been right. Revenge would never have mended my broken heart. Only time and distance had done that. And in the end, I realized something. Even though I hadn't sought revenge, I'd achieved it in the best way possible. I was living well, I was deeply loved, and I was truly happy.